Tonight, you are not here for battles, politics, or dramatic speeches. You are here to slow down. In this story, we will quietly walk through the Roman Empire at night during the Age of Augustus. Not the Rome of war and conquest, but the Rome of streets settling into silence, lamps flickering beside stone walls, water flowing through fountains, and ordinary people living their small, unnoticed lives. Over the next hour, you will travel through quiet markets, empty courtyards, narrow alleys, and along the banks of the Tiber River. You will hear the soft rhythm of the city breathing. You will observe bakers, guards, animals, servants, and citizens, all moving slowly through a peaceful empire. You will also step inside the private world of Augustus himself, not as a conqueror, but as an aging ruler listening to the city he shaped, thinking about time, routine, order, and what remains when ambition fades. This is not a fast story. Nothing rushes here. Every detail is intentional. This story is meant to be listened to the way one listens to the night. Calmly, patiently, without effort. You do not need to remember names or dates. You only need to follow the rhythm. The night Rome held its breath. Rome did not fall asleep easily that night. The streets were quieter than usual, but not calm. Torches still burned at corners. Shadows moved slowly along stone walls. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then stopped. Julius Caesar was dead. Not long ago, his name had filled every space in the city, spoken loudly in the Forum, whispered carefully in the Senate, carved into memory by soldiers who had followed him across rivers and foreign lands. Now there was silence. Not peace, just silence. People closed their doors earlier than usual. Shopkeepers did not argue over prices. Even the taverns felt subdued, their laughter thinner, more cautious. Rome was waiting, though it did not yet know for what. Power never disappears. It only changes hands. Most people believed the future belonged to men they already knew. Mark Antony, strong, loud, familiar. Senators with old names and older ambitions. Generals with loyal legions and quick tempers. Almost no one was thinking about a quiet teenager standing far away from Rome. His name was Gaius Octavius. He was not in the city when Caesar was killed. He was across the sea in Greece, studying, learning rhetoric, learning how to speak, how to listen, how to wait. He was 18 years old, slight in build, often ill, not impressive at first glance. If you passed him on a Roman street, you would not turn your head. That is important to understand. Rome was a city that respected noise, confidence, public strength, men who took space when they walked. Octavian did none of these things. And yet, on that quiet night, his life changed completely. Caesar had named him his heir. Not a symbolic gesture, not a polite mention. His fortune, his name, his legacy. Octavian learned this slowly, piece by piece, like someone waking from a dream. He did not shout, he did not celebrate, he did not rush to Rome with dramatic gestures. He waited. That waiting would define everything that followed. Back in Rome, the city breathed uneasily. Senators met in small groups, not in grand assemblies. Every conversation felt temporary. Every decision felt irreversible. No one trusted the next day. Rome had lived through chaos before. Civil wars, proscriptions, blood on marble steps. Older citizens remembered it well, and younger ones sensed it in the stories told late at night. People wanted stability, but they did not know who could provide it. Mark Antony believed it would be him. He had Caesar's confidence once. He had the loyalty of soldiers. He had presence. When Antony entered a room, people noticed. He spoke as if power already belonged to him. Octavian was not invited to these rooms. When he finally arrived in Italy, he did not come like a conqueror. He came quietly, almost cautiously. He wore simple clothing. He listened more than he spoke. He watched how people reacted when Caesar's name was mentioned. Some dismissed him immediately. A boy, they said, a child playing with a giant's inheritance. Others saw something more unsettling. He did not demand respect. He assumed time would give it to him. Rome underestimated him, and that mistake would echo for centuries. At night, as oil lamps flickered in Roman homes, people wondered what tomorrow would bring. Would Antony seize control? Would the Senate reassert itself? Would soldiers march through the streets again? No one imagined that the future of Rome rested in patience rather than force. Octavian began doing something very Roman and very unusual. He followed the rules. He spoke of restoring the Republic. He honored Caesar publicly, but avoided sounding like a tyrant's successor. He used legal language, traditional forms, old offices. He did not threaten. He suggested. This confused people. Rome understood ambition. It did not understand restraint. Yet restraint was exactly what Octavian practiced. He learned which senators feared chaos more than they feared change. He learned which veterans wanted land, not speeches. He learned how rumors move faster than armies. He learned when to remain silent. While others argued loudly about the future, Octavian shaped it quietly. The city itself seemed to sense something shifting. The stones of Rome had seen kings, consuls, dictators. They had learned patience. Empires grow not in moments of noise, but in long stretches of calm preparation. On that first night after Caesar's death, Rome did not know his successor, but the successor was already awake, already thinking, already waiting. And that is where this story truly begins. Not with a crown, not with a battle, but with a young man who understood that history rewards those who move last. A boy no one took seriously. When Octavian finally stepped onto Italian soil, nothing dramatic happened. No crowds gathered, no trumpets sounded, no one announced his arrival in the Forum. The sea had carried him back quietly, and the land received him the same way. This was not how Rome welcomed men of destiny. He traveled inland without ceremony. He did not rush toward power. He did not challenge Mark Antony. Instead, he observed. He listened to how people spoke about Caesar now that Caesar could no longer speak for himself. The tone had changed. Some praised him openly. Others spoke carefully, measuring each word. A few had already begun to pretend they had never supported him at all. Rome adjusted its memory quickly. Octavian noticed everything. He noticed which senators avoided his eyes. He noticed which veterans lingered when Caesar's name was mentioned. He noticed how uncertainty sat heavier than grief. At 18, he understood something many older men never did. Rome was tired. Years of war had exhausted the city. Citizens wanted stability more than glory. Soldiers wanted land more than speeches. Senators wanted safety more than ideals. Octavian did not promise any of these things loudly. He began with something small and deeply symbolic. He accepted Caesar's name. Gaius Octavius became Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. This was not arrogance, it was strategy. In Rome, names carried weight. Memory carried power. By taking the name, he placed himself inside Caesar's shadow without stepping into his role too quickly. Some laughed at this. They saw a fragile young man borrowing greatness he had not earned. They called him weak, sickly, dependent. Mark Antony dismissed him openly. Antony was everything Octavian was not. He was confident, charismatic, surrounded by soldiers and supporters. He spoke as if Rome already belonged to him, and many believed it might. Octavian did not confront him. Instead, he did something far more unsettling. He followed the law. He went to the Senate. He spoke politely. He requested rather than demanded. He framed his actions as duty, not ambition. He positioned himself as the defender of Caesar's legacy without threatening the Republic directly. This made people uneasy. Rome expected young men to be reckless, passionate, loud. Octavian was none of these things. He was careful with money, distributing parts of Caesar's inheritance to veterans just as promised. He did not use force, he used obligation, gratitude, expectation. Veterans began to notice him, not because he inspired them, but because he delivered. In taverns, conversations shifted slightly. People spoke his name more often, still dismissively but more frequently. That alone mattered. Power begins with repetition. Octavian spent his days learning the rhythms of the city, when the Senate met, when rumors spread, when silence meant danger. He understood that Rome was not governed only by laws, but by habit, and habit could be shaped. At night, he studied letters and reports. He learned who owed money, who feared prosecution, who had supported Caesar too enthusiastically and now worried about their future. He did not expose these men, he remembered them. Meanwhile, Mark Antony grew impatient. He wanted recognition, authority, control. He believed it was owed to him. Rome, however, was slower to decide than he expected. Octavian watched Antony make mistakes. He watched him argue openly with senators. He watched him underestimate public opinion. He watched him confuse strength with inevitability. And he waited. Rome did not belong to Octavian, but it was beginning to listen. The city still slept uneasily at night. The air remained thick with uncertainty, but beneath that uncertainty something subtle was forming. A shift. Not toward revolution, not toward restoration, but toward a new kind of order. One built quietly, patiently, by a boy no one thought dangerous. Yet. The shape of power. Rome rarely handed power to one man at a time. It preferred balance, or the illusion of balance. After Caesar's death, no single figure could claim control without resistance. Too many memories of kings, too many fears of tyranny. The Republic, weakened as it was, still clung to its forms. Out of this tension, a new arrangement began to take shape. 3 men, 3 ambitions, 1 unstable city. Mark Antony was the most visible. He spoke loudly, moved confidently, and expected obedience. He believed power should feel heavy in the hand, unmistakable. Lepidus was different, quieter, less inspiring. He survived by standing close to stronger men. Never too close, never too far. He understood survival better than dominance. Octavian was the youngest, and the most underestimated. Together, they formed what history would later call the Second Triumvirate. At the time, it did not feel historic. It felt temporary, like a compromise no one fully trusted. Rome watched cautiously. This was not unity. It was mutual suspicion dressed as cooperation. The agreement gave them legal authority. Not secret influence, not informal alliances, real, sanctioned power. This mattered. Rome respected legality, even when it disguised force. Each man received territory. Each gained control over armies. Each believed he could eventually outmaneuver the others. Octavian accepted his position without celebration. He did not need the spotlight. He needed legitimacy. While Antony relied on presence, Octavian relied on structure. He learned how power moved when no one was watching. He understood that authority sustained itself through routine. He attended meetings, signed documents, approved measures. Not exciting work, not glorious work, effective work. The city adjusted slowly. People grew used to the idea that 3 men now guided Rome's fate. They stopped expecting quick answers. They learned to wait. Waiting became a theme of the age. The triumvirate did not bring peace. It brought order. And order in Rome often required blood. Lists were drawn. Names were written. Enemies of the state, they were called. In practice, these were men who stood in the way. Political rivals, old grudges, unfinished business from Caesar's time. Rome had seen this before. Proscriptions returned. Properties were seized. Fortunes vanished overnight. Silence became a survival skill. Doors remained closer longer. Conversations shortened. Trust thinned. Octavian participated. This is uncomfortable but necessary to understand. He did not protest the violence. He did not remove himself from responsibility. He learned that power, once accepted, could not remain clean. What distinguished him was not innocence, but control. He did not act out of anger, he acted out of calculation. Antony, by contrast, allowed emotion to guide him. His choices felt personal. His enemies knew why they were targeted. Octavian's did not. Rome noticed the difference. As months passed, the alliance strained. Antony grew restless. He wanted expansion, conquest, recognition beyond Italy. His attention drifted eastward, towards wealth, towards spectacle. Octavian stayed. He remained in Rome, where the paperwork was endless and the rewards invisible. He understood something Antony did not. The city remembers who stays. While Antony sought admiration, Octavian sought dependence. He ensured that decisions required his signature, that systems passed through his hands, that absence weakened others more than it weakened him. The triumvirate began to feel uneven. Lepidus faded into the background, useful but forgettable, a reminder that power shared is rarely power equal. At night, Rome felt heavier, not chaotic, but controlled. Order without warmth, safety without comfort. Citizens adjusted. They always did. What they did not see was the quiet shift occurring beneath the surface. The balance was changing, not through battles, through administration, through patience, through a young man who understood that ruling Rome meant becoming part of its machinery. By the time people sensed what was happening, the shape of power had already changed. It no longer rested in loud declarations. It rested in quiet authority. And Octavian was learning how to hold it. The East, the Queen, and the distance. Rome had always feared the East. Not openly, not officially, but quietly, deeply. The East was wealth. The East was luxury. The East was excess. Rome told itself it was disciplined, restrained, superior. The East represented everything it claimed not to be. When Mark Antony turned his attention away from Rome and toward the eastern provinces, the city noticed. At first, it felt practical. Rome needed order there. Armies needed leadership. Provinces needed control. No one objected publicly. But distance changes perception. Antony was no longer present in Rome's daily life. His voice faded from the forum. His absence created space. And space, in politics, is never empty. It fills with interpretation. In the East, Antony encountered a world unlike Rome. Cities richer, courts quieter, power wrapped in ceremony rather than law. And there was Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, intelligent, calculated, unapologetically regal. She did not ask for Roman approval. She understood power as performance, as presence, as ritual. Antony was drawn to this, not just to her, but to what she represented: escape from Rome's constant judgment, freedom from its endless negotiations and traditions. Their alliance became personal, then political, then inseparable. Back in Rome, the story changed shape. Details blurred, facts stretched. Truth became less important than tone. People whispered that Antony had gone soft, that he dressed like an Eastern king, that he had forgotten Rome, that he was no longer himself. Octavian did not invent these rumors. He allowed them. This distinction matters. He rarely spoke about Antony directly. He spoke about Rome, about tradition, about restraint, about the dangers of excess. Others connected the dots. Cleopatra became the symbol of everything Rome feared: foreign influence, female authority, luxury without discipline. She was portrayed not as a ruler, but as a temptation. This framing was deliberate. Octavian understood that Rome did not need facts, it needed reassurance. Reassurance that its value still mattered. While Antony built a life in the East, Octavian built a narrative in the West. He stayed visible, he attended ceremonies, he supported veterans, he spoke calmly about stability. He positioned himself as Rome's protector rather than its master. The contrast grew sharper. Antony's world felt distant, rich, indulgent. Octavian's felt familiar, measured, Roman. Letters crossed the sea. Agreements were strained. Trust eroded slowly, almost politely. The triumvirate existed in name, but not in spirit. Rome felt the tension without fully understanding it, like a storm forming far away, visible only as a darkening horizon. At night, citizens lay awake listening to the city settle, the sound of footsteps on stone, the distant murmur of guards, the weight of an empire unsure of itself. Octavian waited. He did not rush the conflict. He did not demand resolution. He understood that distance was working in his favor. Antony was becoming an idea rather than a presence. And in Rome, ideas are easier to defeat than men. Before the battle, the waiting. Wars are remembered for their noise, but they are decided in silence. Before Actium, there was no great clash, no sudden declaration that shook the city. There was only a long, tightening pause, like a breath held for too long. Rome sensed what was coming. Ships were prepared quietly, supplies counted and recounted, orders written in careful language. No one spoke of civil war openly, but everyone planned for it. Octavian remained composed. He did not present himself as a conqueror. He presented himself as a necessity, someone who would end uncertainty, not prolong it. In speeches, he spoke of Rome's dignity, of tradition, of the danger of foreign influence. He did not name Cleopatra often. He did not need to. Her image had already settled in the Roman imagination. A queen who did not bow, a court that did not follow Roman customs, a future that felt unfamiliar. Octavian, far away, did not hear these whispers clearly. Distance softened their urgency. Surrounded by wealth and ceremony, Rome felt abstract to him, like a city he once knew well, but no longer fully understood. Octavian understood Rome perfectly. He understood its fear of change, its hatred of uncertainty, its longing for an ending. So he offered one. Not victory, resolution. The fleets gathered near Actium, not hurried, not chaotic, almost deliberate. Commanders waited for signs. Sailors watched the horizon. Nights were long and restless. On Antony's ships, there was tension of a different kind. Loyalty mixed with doubt. Grandeur mixed with fatigue. Cleopatra's presence brought confidence to some and unease to others. Two worlds sat across the water from each other. One grounded in law, image, and restraint. The other in personality, alliance, and display. The sea between them felt narrow. Octavian did not give stirring speeches to his men. He did not promise glory. He promised closure, an end to division, a return to order. For soldiers who had lived through years of civil unrest, this mattered. The night before the confrontation was quiet. Too quiet. Men lay awake listening to water against hulls, to ropes creaking gently, to their own thoughts moving in circles. Some thought of home. Some thought of land promised. Some thought of how Rome would remember this moment. Octavian did not pace restlessly. He did not appear anxious. He trusted preparation more than impulse. This was not a test of courage. It was a test of endurance. Rome had waited a long time for the outcome of Caesar's death. Now it waited again, suspended between two futures. The battle itself would be brief, but what mattered had already happened. Rome had chosen, quietly, who it wanted to follow. Power without a crown. The sea was calm again. Wreckage drifted slowly. Broken oars, torn sails, pieces of a decision already made. Actium was over, and Rome did not cheer loudly. It exhaled. Civil wars end like this, not with celebration, but with relief. Octavian did not rush to declare triumph. He understood something crucial. Rome feared kings more than it feared war, so he did not arrive as a conqueror. He returned as a restorer. In public statements, he spoke of balance, of healing, of returning power to proper hands. He used the language of humility carefully, precisely. He did not say Rome needed him. He said Rome needed stability. This mattered. The Senate was exhausted. Years of fear had made them cautious. They did not want another strong man shouting commands. They wanted predictability, routine, the comfort of familiar forms. Octavian gave them exactly that. He refused the title of king, refused dictatorship, refused anything that sounded permanent or absolute. Each refusal increased his authority. Rome watched closely. Power offered and declined feels safer than power seized. Behind the scenes, nothing was being surrendered. Offices were held, armies remained loyal, provinces answered to him. The machinery of the state ran through his hands, but the surface remained calm. In 27 BCE, the Senate offered him a new name, Augustus. It did not mean king, it did not mean ruler. It meant revered, elevated, touched by something greater, a word without sharp edges. Octavian accepted it. This was the moment Rome crossed the line without noticing it. Augustus did not sit on a throne. He sat among senators. He wore simple clothing. He spoke softly. He insisted the republic still lived, and technically, it did. Consuls were elected. Laws were passed. Debates continued. Everything looked familiar, but nothing functioned the same way. Real authority now rested in one place, spread thin enough to appear harmless. Augustus controlled the armies, controlled key provinces, controlled appointments, controlled time. Rome adjusted. Citizens slept better. Roads felt safer. Grain arrived on schedule. Disorder faded from daily life. For many, this was enough. Peace became normal. And peace, once tasted, becomes addictive. Augustus encouraged this quietly. He rebuilt temples, repaired roads, sponsored games, not to entertain, but to remind. Rome was working again. At night, the city felt different, less anxious, less watchful, more willing to believe tomorrow would resemble today. This was Augustus's greatest achievement. Not conquest, not dominance, but the slow replacement of fear with habit. He had learned what Caesar never fully did. Rome would accept one ruler as long as it could pretend it had not. The ordinary days of an extraordinary peace. Peace does not arrive with ceremony. It arrives quietly, almost unnoticed, through routine. Under Augustus, Rome began to settle into something unfamiliar. Not excitement, not fear, stability. And stability has a texture, a sound, a rhythm. The city woke early. Bakers were among the first. Before sunrise, ovens were already warm. Dough was shaped by hands that had done this every morning for years. Bread mattered in Rome, not symbolically, practically. When bread was steady, people felt safe. Augustus understood this better than most philosophers. Grain shipments were protected, routes secured, shortages avoided whenever possible. No speeches were given about this. It was simply done. People noticed. They always do. As the sun climbed, streets filled slowly, not with urgency, but with purpose. Shopkeepers lifted wooden shutters. Water carriers moved through neighborhoods. Children followed them, sometimes helping, sometimes only watching. Rome felt alive in a quieter way. Public baths opened before midday. These were not luxuries, they were habits. Men and women entered at different hours, greeting neighbors, exchanging small observations. The temperature of the water, a new repair to the floor, a rumor heard earlier that morning. Politics lived here too, softened by steam and routine. Augustus did not avoid these spaces entirely. He appeared carefully, briefly, enough to be seen, not enough to dominate. His presence felt almost accidental. That was intentional. He wanted to feel familiar. The streets themselves changed. Roads were repaired, milestones replaced. Not dramatic projects, but consistent ones. the kind that suggested tomorrow would be navigable. Rome had learned to associate decay with danger. Repair meant continuity. Temples were restored. This was not only religious, it was psychological. Broken temples reminded people of neglect, of disorder. Restored temples suggested care, attention, guardianship. Augustus spoke often of tradition, but he enforced it through maintenance, not force. Even laws followed this pattern. Marriage laws, moral reforms, rules about inheritance and family structure. These were not popular. Many found them intrusive, hypocritical even. But Augustus was not chasing love, he was shaping behavior. Rome had lost too many citizens to war. Families were smaller, lineages fragile. He wanted continuity, not passion. At home, dinners were simple. Augustus ate plainly, so at least people were told. Whether true or not mattered less than the story itself. The ruler who eats like you feels less threatening. Evenings in Rome became predictable. Oil lamps were lit, families gathered, conversations repeated familiar topics, news from provinces, repairs on nearby buildings, the price of bread. Peace is repetitive. That repetition calms the mind. Guards still walked the streets, but their presence felt routine rather than urgent. Not watching, just there. Rome slept differently now. Less alert, less prepared to wake suddenly. This was dangerous in theory, but comforting in practice. Augustus understood something deeply human. People will trade freedom they do not feel for safety they can touch. And safety, once normalized, becomes invisible. Years passed like this. Children grew up knowing only this version of Rome. They did not remember Caesar's murder. They did not remember marching armies. Disorder was something older people mentioned quietly, like a bad dream. For them, Augustus was not a revolutionary. He was simply there. And that, more than anything else, defined his rule. Not the battles he won, not the enemies he defeated, but the days that passed without incident. A city functioning, a people sleeping. That is how empires endure. The cost of order. Peace always sends the bill later. Under Augustus, Rome looked calm. Streets worked. Laws functioned. The empire breathed evenly. But order does not exist in public spaces alone. It presses inward, into homes, into families, into private lives. This was where Augustus paid most dearly. He believed deeply that Rome's strength depended on morality, not abstract virtue, but behavior, marriage, children, duty, discipline. He saw declining birth rates and loose customs as threats equal to armies. So he legislated morality. Marriage laws rewarded families with children, punished those without. Adultery was no longer just a private failure, it became a public crime. Rome listened politely. Rome did not obey eagerly. Many senators resented these laws. They followed them publicly and ignored them privately. Augustus knew this. He tolerated it, to a point. Then there was Julia, his daughter. She was intelligent, charismatic, surrounded by attention from a young age. Augustus married her strategically, not once but several times. Each marriage served the state, alliances, stability, succession. Julia was not consulted. She learned early that her life belonged to Rome before it belonged to herself. Outwardly, she played the role. She hosted gatherings. She appeared loyal. She smiled when required. Inwardly, she resisted quietly, then openly. Her personal life became public scandal, affairs, mockery of moral laws, defiance that felt deliberate. Rome watched closely. This was not just gossip. This was a test. If Augustus could not enforce his laws within his own family, they meant nothing. He hesitated. This matters. He was not eager to punish her. He delayed. He hoped. He negotiated privately. But pressure grew. Senators whispered. Citizens murmured. Enemies smiled quietly. Order demands consistency. Eventually, Augustus acted. Julia was exiled. Not quietly, not gently, publicly enough to be understood. She was sent away from Rome, cut off from luxury, from influence, from the life she had known. The man who preached morality had punished his own child. Rome absorbed the message. The law applied to everyone, even this. Privately, Augustus suffered. Sources tell us he wept, that he avoided speaking her name, that he regretted the rigidity of his own system. But regret did not reverse decisions. Power rarely allows revision. His family life continued to fracture. Potential heirs died young. Trusted relatives disappointed him. Succession plans collapsed repeatedly. The irony was sharp. The man who brought stability to an empire could not secure peace in his own house. As years passed, Augustus aged visibly. Illness followed him. Fatigue settled into his posture. He continued to appear in public, continued to perform the role Rome needed, but the ease of earlier years faded. At night, he reflected on what order required. He had ended wars. He had built peace. He had shaped a system that would outlive him. And yet, he had sacrificed intimacy, warmth, choice. Rome slept peacefully. Augustus did not always. This is the hidden cost of control. To stabilize millions, you often destabilize yourself. Rome would remember him as a savior of order. History would praise his restraint. But the man himself knew the truth. Peace is never free. It is only purchased differently. The weight of time. Old age does not arrive suddenly. It settles in quietly, like dust. Augustus had ruled Rome for decades by now, long enough that many citizens could not remember a time before him, long enough that his presence felt permanent, almost natural. Children were born, grew up, and became adults under the same ruler. That alone was extraordinary. His body, however, did not share Rome's sense of permanence. Illness followed him constantly. Fevers came and went. His strength faded in cycles. Some days he appeared steady and alert. Other days he moved slowly, supported by attendants, conserving energy with every step. Rome adjusted its expectations. Meetings were shorter, appearances more deliberate, words chosen carefully, silence used often. Augustus learned the art of limitation. He no longer tried to do everything. He delegated. He trusted systems rather than impulse. This was not weakness, it was refinement. Years earlier, he had built routines for the city. Now he built routines for himself. He rose early as he always had. Habits remain when ambition fades. He ate lightly. He listened more than he spoke. He spent long hours reviewing reports, not because he needed them, but because the act itself felt grounding. Paper, ink, familiar names. They reminded him that Rome still functioned. He thought often about memory. Not how Rome would remember him, he had accepted that long ago. He thought about how Rome remembered itself. Civil wars were becoming distant stories. Caesar was becoming legend. Chaos was something older people mentioned with a kind of disbelief. This pleased him. It also unsettled him. He knew how fragile peace truly was, how easily systems collapsed when personalities replaced institutions. He had built Rome to outlast him, but certainty is never absolute. Succession troubled him deeply. He had planned carefully, too carefully perhaps. He had chosen heirs, then buried them. Promising young men died early. Accidents, illness, fate. Each loss narrowed the future. Eventually, only Tiberius remained. Capable, cold, reluctant. Augustus did not love him easily. He trusted him more than he liked him. That distinction mattered. Rome did not need warmth, it needed continuity. He adopted Tiberius not with joy, but with acceptance. He trained him slowly, exposing him to responsibility, watching how he handled isolation and authority. This was not mentorship, it was testing. At night, Augustus lay awake thinking about what came next. not in grand terms, but in details. Would grain still arrive on time? Would soldiers remain loyal to the states rather than a man? Would the Senate remember how to function? These were the thoughts of someone who had spent a lifetime preventing collapse. He no longer dreamed of conquest, he dreamed of quiet mornings. Rome itself mirrored his age. The city felt settled, heavy with history, confident in its permanence. Roads worn smooth by decades of use, buildings repaired and repaired again. The novelty of peace had faded. Peace had become background noise. Augustus watched public life from a slight distance now withdrawn but removed. He understood that overpresence could be as damaging as absence. The best systems run without constant correction. Occasionally, he would walk through familiar areas of the city, not ceremonially, almost anonymously, listening to conversations, watching faces. Most people did not recognize him immediately. This pleased him more than recognition ever had. It meant the system worked. He thought about Julia. He rarely spoke her name, but absence has its own weight. He wondered whether Rome had demanded too much from him or whether he had demanded too much from himself. There were no clean answers, only outcomes. As his strength faded, Augustus prepared Rome for a future without him. Instructions were written, boundaries clarified, power distributed carefully. He did not seek dramatic endings, he sought smooth transitions. In this, he succeeded more than any Roman before him. Old age stripped away illusion. He no longer believed he had saved Rome. He believed he had delayed its decline, and delay, he understood, was often the best history allowed. At times, he felt satisfaction. At times, deep weariness. Mostly, acceptance. The man who once waited patiently for power now waited patiently for release. Rome slept soundly, and Augustus, finally, allowed himself to rest. The last night. The city of Rome slept under quiet skies. Torches flickered in the streets, but not for long. A faint wind carried the scent of the Tiber through narrow alleys. The river reflected the stars, trembling like silver threads in the darkness. Augustus lay in his private chamber. The lamps were low, their light barely touching the walls lined with scrolls and tablets. He did not read. He did not speak. He simply observed the familiar room, the furniture worn, the floors polished, the air heavy with decades of memory. He thought of time. Not the years he had ruled, but the moments he had lived. A boy arriving quietly in Rome. A young man underestimated. A leader in an uneasy balance with his city. A father struggling with a daughter he could not fully protect. All of it condensed into this last evening. Outside, Rome breathed evenly. No armies marched, no senators shouted, no citizens feared the shadows. Only the slow rhythm of night, footsteps of guards, the distant splash of water, the soft sighs of sleepers. Augustus reflected on his life. The victories were important. The peace he had built was important. But he understood the weight of what he had lost more keenly than what he had gained. Family, youth, comfort, the private joys of a life less disciplined. All sacrificed for an empire that would outlast him. And yet, he did not regret. Regret is loud, and he had spent his life mastering quiet authority. What remained was acceptance, of choices made, of moments past, of the empire that had grown steady beneath his hand. He closed his eyes. The city around him settled further. The river flowed calmly. The streets remained empty. The stars continued to shine. History would remember Augustus as a ruler, a builder, a restorer. But for one last night, he was merely a man. A man who had waited, always waited. And now, finally, he could rest. Rome slept. The empire endured, and the night held its breath one final time. Rome woke gradually, The sun rose over the terracotta rooftops, spilling soft light over the stone streets. Birds stirred first, their gentle chirping blended with a faint rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. Smoke from early fires drifted lazily upward, carrying the scent of baking bread, roasted grain, and herbs. In small homes, families stirred. A mother quietly swept the floor, careful not to wake her children fully. A baker kneaded dough, pressing and folding it in measured rhythm, pausing occasionally to glance at the sky, checking how the light touched his oven. A child tugged at his father's cloak, eager for a slice of bread, only to be gently guided back to the side. The streets began to fill. Water carriers walked slowly, balancing clay jars on their shoulders. Merchants lifted shutters, revealing neatly arranged jars of olives, garlands of fruit, and freshly spun wool. Shopkeepers murmured greetings to neighbors passing by. Conversations were subdued. No one rushed, no one shouted. Each gesture was deliberate, each sound soft and rhythmic, forming a quiet pulse through the city. Augustus observed it all from his villa. He did not need to intervene. He simply noted the order, the repeated motions, the small consistencies that held the city together. The rising sun, the gentle chatter, the measured steps of countless individuals. These were the unseen threads of power, the foundation of peace. The evening light and shadows. As the day wore on, shadows shifted across the streets. Sunlight touched carved stone, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Children chased one another along narrow alleys, their laughter muted against the walls. Old men sat on benches near fountains, tossing crumbs to pigeons, observing life without participating too eagerly. Oil lamps were lit one by one, glowing faintly against the evening sky. The street smelled of cooling bread, wood smoke, and the faint brine from the river. Guards walked slowly, their sandals barely making noise against the cobblestones. Even the clatter of carts was softened, as if the city itself preferred quiet. Augustus walked through the Forum alone, unnoticed by most. He admired how the light fell across familiar statues, highlighting their imperfections, their texture, the way moss had crept into the crevices. He considered that Rome's permanence was built not in grand gestures, but in countless tiny acts repeated faithfully, day after day, decade after decade. The gentle sound of water. At night, Augustus often lingered near the Tiber. The river flowed endlessly, slow and calm. Boats drifted quietly, carrying small cargoes of grain or pottery, the occasional ripple brushing against their sides. He would watch the water, noticing the way moonlight shimmered on the surface, the way shadows of nearby buildings danced softly, merging and separating with each gentle wave. He listened to the lapping water, to the faint squeak of a rope, to distant voices carrying across the river. Each sound reassured him that life continued, uninterrupted, that his city, his empire, endured quietly, predictably, slowly. He thought of the past wars, of the battles that had once filled the city with noise, fire, and chaos. Now the river reminded him that time itself could accomplish what armies could not. Slowly, imperceptibly, it shaped the world, just as patience had shaped Rome under his rule. The invisible work of peace. Not all work is visible. Augustus knew this. The empire ran on small, repeated efforts that rarely drew attention. Couriers carried messages in the dark before sunrise. Watchmen patrolled without incident. Grain was measured, stored, and delivered according to precise schedules. Streets were repaired before potholes became noticeable. Temples and fountains were cleaned, maintained, restored. These acts were invisible to most, but they created the texture of safety. Citizens moved confidently through the city without understanding how carefully each day had been orchestrated. That was the genius of Augustus's reign, not the battles he fought, not the enemies he defeated, but the way he ensured life flowed smoothly, predictably, comfortably. And Augustus himself performed these invisible acts daily, reviewing records, approving allocations, listening to minor complaints, making decisions no one would remember, which ensured the city endured. Each small act reinforced a rhythm, and in rhythm, Rome found rest. The night market. Rome at night moved quietly. Markets did not close entirely. Small stalls remained lit with faint oil lamps. Fishmongers arranged their wares slowly, careful to keep them cool by damp cloth. Bakers checked leftover bread, cutting small pieces to sell cheaply to late wanderers. A lone cat weaved between stalls, its paws silent against cobblestones. Children peered through doorways, fascinated by shadows dancing on walls. Occasionally, the distant splash of a barge against a riverbank punctuated the calm. Augustus did not wander here. He watched from a distance, imagining the gentle rhythms. The city needed these small motions to feel alive, but not too alive. Each transaction, each step, each whispered word maintained the balance. Peace was as much in these gestures as in laws or armies. The animals of the city. Even in the heart of Rome, life existed quietly. Dogs slept at doorsteps, birds nested in the corners of buildings, cooing softly. Rats scuttled along alleys, unnoticed, feeding on scraps. Occasionally, a donkey brayed in a distant courtyard, carrying a small cart of firewood. Augustus noted these sounds. Life continued unthreatened, unhurried. The city was not silent, it was calm, filled with small movements that created a steady pulse. Power, he understood, was less in commands than in allowing the city to live naturally. Observation became his tool, patience his weapon. The solitude of Augustus. In the quiet hours before dawn, Augustus sat in his study. The lamps were low, shadows stretched across scrolls and tables. He did not read, he did not write. He listened. To the faint creak of furniture as servants moved, to the distant bark of a dog, to the river murmuring far away. These sounds reminded him of time passing, not in great events, not in battles, but in minutes, hours, days repeated endlessly. Rome survived because its people moved in predictable patterns, unnoticed. His control was subtle, woven into these patterns rather than imposed upon them. He sometimes imagined walking among ordinary citizens unnoticed, observing a baker's careful kneading, a child's hesitant steps, a shopkeeper adjusting a display. These small actions, repeated endlessly, were the true architecture of empire. The weight of silence. Silence was not absence, it was presence, carefully moderated. Augustus understood this better than anyone. Nights were quiet, but full of subtle activity. Guards walked softly, water flowed along the Tiber, cats prowled, doors opened, closed, whispered. Each sound contributed to the texture of life. Even in the absence of noise, Rome functioned. Citizens felt security without realizing it. Augustus allowed them to believe the city moved naturally, but every motion had been subtly arranged over decades. Silence was not empty. It was his most effective form of governance. The river's murmur. The Tiber flowed endlessly. Augustus often stood silently by its banks, feeling the cool evening breeze brushing against his skin. The water reflected the moonlight, shifting in gentle ripples. Boats floated slowly, carrying small cargoes, jars of olive oil, bundles of grain, pottery stacked carefully. Each movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial. He listened. The soft slap of water against the hulls, the faint scrape of ropes tied to moorings, the distant murmur of men speaking in low voices on the far shore. The city's heartbeat existed here, in the measured pace of labor, in the rhythm of commerce, in the river's persistent flow. Peace, he realized, was not loud. It was in the quiet, in the predictable patterns of work, in the careful passage of goods, in the small sounds that gave citizens a sense of continuity. Watching the river, he imagined all of Rome as one vast network of subtle motions, each tiny act contributing to the enduring pulse of the empire. Courtyards and stone steps. The city itself was a labyrinth of courtyards, stairways, and narrow alleys. Augustus walked these paths in his memory, tracing worn stones beneath his feet. The texture of stone, the warmth retained from the sun, the slight unevenness that tested the pace of his steps, each detail reminded him of permanence. In the courtyards, laundry hung on lines, fluttering in the faint wind. A child's laughter echoed softly from an open window. Servants moved quietly, adjusting benches, sweeping dust, arranging vessels. Even minor actions, like the slow dripping of water from a fountain, held weight. They reinforced the illusion that Rome functioned effortlessly, when in truth, every small act had been carefully supported by centuries of accumulated habit. Augustus valued these moments because they were uncelebrated. They required no applause, no recognition. They existed simply, and therefore truthfully, sustaining life quietly. The faint smells of the city. Smell carries memory. Augustus noticed this. Morning brought the scent of baking bread, mixed with the tang of river water and the earthy aroma of wet stone after a light rainfall. Later, herbs simmered in small kitchens and firewood burned softly in ovens. At night, lamps smoked gently, releasing a subtle fragrance that reminded him of countless evenings spent in calm observation. These sensory details, he understood, mattered as much as laws or armies. Citizens felt safe because their environment moved predictably. Repetition, smell, light, sound all combined into a texture of life that reassured people unconsciously. The night walks of Augustus. Augustus often walked alone after dusk. The city was quiet, yet not empty. Guards moved softly, their sandals brushing the stones. Cats prowled alleyways. Dogs slept lazily at doorsteps. Occasionally, a voice called from a balcony, a neighbor greeting another in hushed tones. Each sound contributed to a rhythm he understood instinctively. He walked slowly, noting every detail: the angle of light from an oil lamp, the shadow of a column stretching across cobblestones, the subtle glimmer of water from a fountain. He had once believed power resided in armies, in laws, in public acclamation. Now he knew that true authority often lay in observation, in patience, in understanding the invisible structures of daily life. Rome functioned best when its ruler interfered least, when its rhythms were uninterrupted, when every ordinary act, every step, every drop of water, every clink of pottery was quietly part of the larger system he had built. The Empire in Small Motions. Rome never truly sleeps. Even in the darkest hours, life moves in subtle, almost invisible ways. In narrow alleys, a woman stirred water in a clay basin, washing clothes slowly. Each motion was deliberate, rhythmic, soothing. She hummed quietly, a melody so soft it almost blended with the whisper of the wind brushing against the rooftops. A child sat nearby, picking at crumbs of bread, listening, half awake, half dreaming. On the wide streets, a lone cart moved with a steady creak. The oxen's hooves fell in careful intervals. A merchant balanced a basket of fresh figs, adjusting the weight gently as he walked, listening to the distant sound of water dripping from a fountain. Nothing rushed, nothing demanded attention. Everything existed in a subtle order. Augustus observed from a quiet terrace. Not with pride, not with anxiety, he simply noticed. The slow turning of the city fascinated him more than any parade or victory. Every minor act, sweeping a floor, tending a garden, adjusting a jar of olives, was a thread in the fabric of his empire. Without these threads, even the strongest laws would fray. He thought of the courtyards he had repaired decades ago, how children now ran across the same stones he had polished, how pigeons roosted on walls he had stabilized, how the sound of distant laughter and clinking pottery created a harmony he could not command, but could only guide. The Tiber flowed below, steady, relentless, reflecting moonlight in slow, liquid ripples. Boats floated silently, their sails lowered, carrying only whispers of commerce. He imagined the water as a mirror to his own life, persistent, patient, shaping the land around it with unseen pressure. Every small ripple mattered, every minor wave contributed to the slow movement of the world. Even in the heart of Rome, animals moved quietly. Cats prowled, tails high, sniffing for scraps. Dogs slept curled in doorways, breathing evenly. Birds settled into the shadows of temples and statues, calling softly when disturbed. Each creature, each sound, contributed to the texture of the city, invisible but indispensable. At night, Augustus walked slowly along familiar stone paths. He did not hurry. He noticed the coolness of the marble beneath his feet, the slight unevenness of the cobblestones, the faint glimmer of moonlight on a column. He listened to the distant murmur of conversation, the gentle sigh of wind, the soft clatter of a loose shutter swinging in its hinges. Rome functioned quietly, and this quiet was the true measure of his success. He paused beside a fountain, watching water trickle from a spout into a basin. He traced its path with his eyes, imagining how many centuries it had flowed in one form or another. He thought of himself, of his city, of the slow accumulation of habits and routines that had turned chaos into order, unpredictability into stability. He closed his eyes. For a long time, he simply listened. The faint sounds of life, the soft ripple of water, the breathing of the city itself. This was Rome at its most honest, at its most enduring, not in speeches, not in battles, not in laws, but in the infinite smallness of everyday motion. And Augustus understood that here, amid the ordinary, the repetitive, the quiet, he had truly shaped the empire.
If you have remained here, listening quietly, then this slow pace may already feel familiar to you. This channel exists for evenings like this, for nights that move slowly, when the mind prefers steady voices and stories that do not ask for attention. Here, stories from history continue in the same way, unhurried, undramatic, returning again and again to calm moments, ordinary lives, and long passages of time. New stories are added gently, one after another, without urgency, waiting patiently to be found whenever another quiet night arrives. There is no need to remember this moment, no need to decide anything tonight. The stories will remain here, ready whenever rest comes first. For now, the night can continue as it is, slow, uninterrupted, and undemanding.